I'm Dan John, and welcome to the Dan John Podcast, episode 9. Sorry, I've been in Europe and couldn't help myself. So today our location's a little different. I'm in downtown Dublin, Ireland. We got in last night. It's interesting, as easy as travel can be in Europe, sometimes it's still connection. There's a great movie, Steve Martin, Trains, Planes, and Automobiles, and that's what it feels like to me this morning. Had a wonderful weekend with my friend Ole up there in Denmark in Odense. I did a 2-day workshop there. Of course, to get from beautiful Murray, Utah, all the way to Odense, Denmark, involves about a 23-hour trip, which is fine, and it's wonderful. The place we stay at, the Grand Hotel in Odense, might be, you just feel like you're back in 1895, and it is a wonderful place. The artwork is exquisite. There's stained glass windows. Christopher, the bartender, is probably the best bartender in the world I've ever seen. If you ask him, it's like at the end of the movie Ratatouille, where he says, surprise me. If you say surprise me, you're going to get a drink that is just amazing. He's an amazing guy. Ole and everybody at the workshop was just phenomenal. And then popped on a train, spent some time in airport lounges, airplanes, and then finally a cab. We got in last night, and we found another great bar called the Mint Bar here at the bottom of the Westin, which used to be a bank vault, and they turned it into a bar. So I think jet lag's behind me. Today we jump on a train up to Belfast, where I'll spend some time with my friend Niall and his wife Louise, and do 2 more workshops up there, one with him and one with Emma, and then finally get a chance to go to vacation in Galway. So here we are, and let's answer your questions. Actually, what's nice about this first question today, folks, is that it comes from a good friend of mine who we've gotten to know each other through the years with his work with the military and my work helping the military. And he asked 2 questions, and I think the first is a tough one, and the second one is a little bit easier. So the first one is, how do you get your children on the right path to getting strong? What age to start, and any specific techniques you've used in the past? Well, if we're talking about my kids, George, they'd be a lot like yours. They just kind of grew up around a home of fitness and training. When they were little, my wife did a Highland Games and Olympic lift. Well, when mommy's Olympic lifting, the children see it as just being normal. Of course, with dad out there all the time, tilting against the various windmills of Highland Games, discus throwing, weight pentathlon, Olympic lifting, football, and all the other idiocy I put those poor girls through, that kind of thing becomes more normal. For me, I think fitness should be like meals. It should be just part of the day. I would hate it if, 3 times a year you would have dental hygiene day, where you took your kids aside and said, okay, today we're going to floss, today we're going to brush our teeth, and today we're going to see the dentist. I'm not sure that would be a very good thing for their long-term teeth health. The old joke, I won't say what state we usually reference, but how do you know that the toothbrush was invented in, put the state's name in, because in any other state they'd call it a teeth brush. Old joke was still funny. So probably the best thing you can do is have fitness as part of mom and dad's routine. It also really seemed to help in their case to have people at the dinner table, people at discus camp, people at just part of their lives who held fitness and sports as an important factor. It makes me happy that both of my daughters still train. My daughter Lindsay will talk about her workouts. Lindsay's 27 and we'll be talking about a box squat workout she did and how it made her butt sore. And it just, I don't know, if as a female you can kind of hold it together in your 20s, good things happen the rest of your life. And it makes me, and this is just from my observations, and it just makes me happy that my daughters at 27 and 29 still embrace the health and fitness benefits of proper training. So once again, like what I tell people in every aspect of everything, it's all about modeling. It's always modeling behavior. And I think, George, from what I've seen, you're doing the right things. Question number 2. Can you speak on the negative effects of training too much? Yes. It catches up to you and beats you down. Oh, but there's more. Specifically, when you turn into a walking bag of cortisol and it starts affecting your sleep and attitude towards loved ones. In my community, we feel that more is always better and that we've lost training value if we don't leave in a pool of sweat each and every single time. Well, for our listeners, if you do go to danjohnworkouts.com, I do have a program that I designed specifically for our listener, George. It's the redeployment workout, because in the community George is talking about, there is always this one-upmanship. And the only problem with that is that is never proved in any place to ever work. It's interesting because it was the great American football coach, Bill Walsh, who figured out, because of his interactions with track and field coaches, Bill Walsh used to go to track practices because he wanted to know how come track athletes were so fast. And he looked around and people were stretching, people would go hard, and then they would have 15, 20-minute breaks. And he would ask the coaches, well, won't they go faster if you make them work harder? And of course, track coaches look at you like, you might be smart, but you're stupid, And one of the great lessons of life is that you can't live linear path. It just doesn't work. It's like the old thing about, the wise man did the emperor a favor. And the emperor said, I'll give you anything you want. And he said, well, tell you what, for 1 month, on day 1, you'll give me $1, 1 pound, 1 kroner, whatever the number was. And on day 2, you just double it. You give me $2. And on day 3, you just double it. And you give me $4. On day 4, you double that. And of course, by the end of the month, the entire empire was bankrupt because that geometric progression is uncheckable. Most of us think that's how we improve. Sadly, that doesn't happen. When I was young, I used to hate the plateau. And I used to hate, the down. And then late in my career, I realized that the plateaus and the down times were actually the times that prepared me for that magic bow and arrow effect that shot me back up to the top. So much so, I would have these performances that shocked me. And of course, that surprise of how far it went kind of got my arousal level going. And the next one would go even farther. And it's a lesson I wish I would have learned as a child, but you just can't. So if the only thing I can say is people who like to train, we used to call it balls to the wall, there's always a downside to it. And what's going to happen is you're going to be a broken old man at 35, and it's just not worth doing it that way. It's much smarter to fall in love with the plateau and embrace it and not try to drive it up, but rather just say, this is where I am today. What a good workout, and come back and just keep coming back. This is from Liam, and I think I'm the only strength coach in the world that would get a question like this. My uncle passed away earlier this year. My father and I attended the funeral in Ireland. Religion is strong in the community with everyone but my father for quite understandable reasons, and I apologize for this. Having been educated and abused by Catholic clergy. This has turned him into not just an atheist, but an anti-atheist. There's other terms for that, but wearing shirts scorning sacred scripture. He was the only one not to kneel and pray with my family and community in the church. And no, he didn't wear the anti-theist shirt to the service. He believes that my uncle's he believes that my uncle's life ended with his death. And if he had a soul, there is no heaven, hell, or afterlife for it to go. My father lives a good life and noble life, and he has worked to raise a family. Yet these beliefs, or lack thereof, bother me. I'd appreciate a wise man's thoughts on this matter. And well, that's a tough one. It is. I think people are allowed to have pain, and I think people are allowed to look back on rough experiences and say, this ruined me. But I also think it's our job to stand up one day and say, that was then. And this is a hard one. This isn't this, well, it is a concept of strength here, but one of the most releasing things you can do, and I think we got this from what happened in South Africa after apartheid ended. It was such a great lesson for me. They had this committee where basically people would go and say, in prison, I murdered the following 35 people, and here are their names, and the family members would be in the audience. I killed your child, I killed your child, I killed your child. And there was no repercussion for it. It was just to clear the air. And then a few weeks ago, this young man, this police officer in the United States, went into the wrong apartment and shot the person who was rightfully in their apartment. Well, when they were sentencing, the brother of the dead said, "Do you mind if I hug you?" And he walked over and he hugged his brother's killer. And I thought to myself, we always talk about this thing called forgiveness. Nobody does it. Nobody does it. But when you watch it in real time and you watch someone forgiving, it was so powerful and so unusual. It really was an eye-opener for me. You might not be able to change your father's thoughts, and because that's just the way of the world. But you can learn the lesson from your father, and you said a good and noble man, to forgive in your life. And everybody has bad things happen to them. Poor coaching, poor teaching. Someone else's driving skills might have put you in the hospital. But maybe in this case, you can learn the lesson of the power of forgiveness. When I'm around with elite athletes sometimes, and all they talk about is 1974, and they can't move beyond, they can't move their needle ahead, and they're stuck in this place where President Nixon just resigned, which is a good idea rather than being impeached. And there's OPEC gas prices are through the roof, and American cars are terrible. And why do you want to live in the past? Why do you want to live then? I don't know how I can help your father, but I think I can help you to understand the great insights and power of forgiveness. And as the young lady says in the movie, let it go. Now, everybody who knows me also knows that my motto is never let go. So I am sort of speaking, as we say in America, out my ass, because I don't do these things, but I know that it's crippling me in many ways. So use your father and love your father and appreciate your father, but also learn the lesson of forgiveness. Got a question from Mike. Mike, there's only one name I recognize up here, but I'll answer the question as best I can. What are your thoughts on the more lifestyle-based aspects of work, like MoveNet, Katie Bauman, and Rafi Kelly? For example, barefoot, zero-drop shoes, using chairs less, and sitting on the ground. I do find it interesting that these people think they invented this stuff. All you need to really do is go on a 4 or 5 month hike, or here in the United States, you can join this little thing called the U.S. Army The Marine Corps has this same nice thing where they will they will take you out in the field for months and teach you all these wonderful tips. My brother Gary one time was asked, "How come you never go camp? You never go camping?" Well, I can't exactly say it because the answer was filled with F-bombs, but it's like, he goes, "I camped in Vietnam for a year, and I don't need any more." Now, just imagine dropping an F-bomb and every single chance you can in that sentence. Yeah, I'm a big fan of it. I actually signed up, Mike, for the MoveNet workshop, and I got a very nice email from the company a few months later because I was the only person who signed up for the workshop. So yeah, I'm a big believer of it. I think it's wonderful. I find their videos amazing because the waters that they swim in, are just pristine and beautiful. Every log they climb on is, they're just smooth and white. And I'm just not sure that the natural environment is always so perfect. Generally, when you jump into a water, there's an alligator, crocodile, or shark waiting for you. So, but I think it's a wonderful thing. And I've been a fan of it for a long, long time. Our next question comes from Dave, and it says, a former SF guy. Now, in my world, that means I could be a former San Francisco guy or a former Special Forces guy. Let's just go with the idea that I think he might be Special Forces. And we've talked about this before, Kevin and I. I'm curious to what your opinion will be on the Army changing their physical fitness test from 2 minutes of push-ups and sit-ups followed by a 2-minute run to the Army Combat Fitness Test. And he reviews it, and I'll just read it off. The new test consists of a 3-rep max hex bar deadlift, a backward 10-pound med ball toss, hand release push-ups. I wonder how they got those. A sprint drag carry, leg tucks off of a pull-up bar, elbows to quads, and the 2-mile run. There's a lot of people complaining since 30% of tested males have failed and 80+% of tested females have failed. Yeah, David, you're right. My God, people are failing a fitness test. I always thought that was a good idea. I like to give students a test on day one in a semester. I give them basically a preview of the final, and I'm hoping that they get 20 to 30% on it. Because what that does is it opens up to a better way of thinking. As people figure out that this test is serious and this test is real, I think you'll notice that people begin to train to the test. Now, if you're asking me, someone training to the deadlift, the med ball toss, the push-up, the carry, leg tucks, and 2-mile run, if they're testing up to that, they're testing up to a lot of important things. I really like the test a lot. Now, having said that, it's new and it's early, and already there's been some subtle changes made, but I am a big fan of it. I have no idea what a 2-minute sit-up. I've never seen anyone in a battlefield or the field of play do 2 minutes of sit-ups. And I'm sure someone has, and I'll get an email about that. Back in the Civil War one time when the Confederates were coming over the mountain, I had to sit underneath the log and, do 2 minutes of sit. I'm sure that's what an email I'll get. But I'm a big fan, David. Thank you. My friend Gavin emailed me. I wanted to ask if you could talk briefly about barbell wrist mobility. My wrists are incredibly stiff and don't bend back well at all. And that is right there, my friend, maybe the issue. You go on right here for more about kettlebells and front squats and arms crossed, which you got to stop doing. So the wrist, if all you do is stretch this way, you completely miss wrist flexibility. The wrist has a band around it. And so one of the things you learn when you break your wrist in 8 parts is that to get your wrist flexibility back, you can't just push this way. In fact, the problem is it'll teach these muscles to just relax, but it won't be true flexibility. So one thing I recommend is learning to stretch it this way. You're going to drive the thumb down the sternum as hard as you can. Then spend some quality time stretching this way and this way. We do an exercise called vents in our training, where you put your hands on the ground in those positions and you use your body weight to stretch your hands back into place. Now, the other thing I want you to think about is when you get in the rack for the front squat, don't try a few sets where you have your hands out straight, like in Frankenstein's monster position, okay? With your hands completely horizontal like this, but so that the weight sits back here. You don't want the weight down here. You want it back. And just try those ideas first. So another thing that might help is if you have a hot tub or you have a hot bath, is stretching your wrists in the hot water. That was a game changer for me with my broken left wrist. So just a few ideas. I would suggest the word in your head, coax, C-O-A-X, gently coax your wrists into more flexibility. Don't force them, nudge them towards more flexibility. We have a good question from Alex. In Now What? Which makes me happy. He mentions a book that no one actually has ever read, which is my favorite book by you. I'm on my second reading. Alex, that alone, I mean, that puts you in elite air. You are like a trillionaire on the planet right now. You're like Miss Universe. There's very few of you. You discuss the sex drive movements being done for 15 to 25 reps, and the thrive movements operate in a different range. So the sex drive movements would be the push, the pull, and the squat. And then what I call the thrive movements would be the hinge and the loaded carry. My question is, rather than planning workouts weeks and months in advance, which I think is insane, what I'm used to, is the goal to just let the weights increase naturally over time in these movements? Yes, absolutely. In the beginning, when you do 3 sets of 8 in the push, pull, and squat, you're going to find yourself bounding up quite quickly in load. But then all of a sudden, it's going to and ease out, which means you're going to have to slide into a different rep scheme, maybe 3 sets of 5. And pretty soon that's going to slow down. Then you'll flip over to 5 sets of 3. And then pretty soon you'll get bored with that and go back to 3 sets of 8. So I just threw that together for you. 3 sets of 8, 3 sets of 8, 3 sets of 5, 5 sets of 3. All good workouts. And you just let the reps, the sets, and the load dance with each other. Ideally, over time, load will climb up. Do I just pick a rep range for the day and then decide as I go how heavy the weight the day should be? That's actually not a bad way either. I have a little, with easy strength, I have a little set of numbers called 5, 3, 2. And a set of 5, and then you go heavier, set of 3, and then you go heavier, and you have to make a double. And what I found is that sometimes that 3 was all over the place. And sometimes the 3 was so easy, I could really go up to a heavier double. So I am a believer of letting the day determine the load. We have good days and bad days. I think about 1 out of 5 workouts is going to be pretty good. And then 1 out of 5 workouts is going to be pretty bad. And the other 3 are just, normal days. So in a 2-week period, you might have 2 great workouts. In a 2-week period, you might have 2 bad workouts. My idea is just, that's what happened. Don't worry about it. As long as you keep a view of 5 years or 10 years, those small bad days, those small good days, all they do is accumulate up over the time. Once I had serious lifted for about 8 years, that's when I realized that, like, micro changes, these guys are all in the micro, where you go up, like, they have these little metal magnets that they put on the weight so they can go up every single workout. I realized after a while that I never even used, I'll use English pounds here, but they have the 2.5 pound weights, the 5 pound plates, the 10 pound plates. I found out after about 8 years of training that I never used them at all. I mean, I might jump from 185 to 205 to 225 to 255 because those micro changes, they were just, it was too much thought. Where once the engine gets big enough, you're just trying to get yourself to those big attempts. I don't know how much that helped, but this is a good question, and I'm glad you're reading the book. We have a postscript here, or a PS, as some people would call it. If you have an idea for standards in Highland Games, I'd be curious to hear them, or would they fall in line with the standards for elite discus throwers? Yeah, he's talking about a 250 snatch, a 300 clean, 450 back squat, and a 400-pound bench. I think the problem with a lot of Highland Gamers is that for one thing, a lot of them train like powerlifters in the gym. There is carryover, but they just get, it's not the way, those aren't throwing events, exercise. They're part of it, but you want your Olympic lifts. Yeah, I would say those would be the best standards, plus maybe some kind of farmer walk, big, heavy farmer walk, like maybe a double body weight for some distance on a trap bar, but it'd be up to you to measure that. Okay. Highland Games changed radically in my life from being a really fun event to being a track meet in a kilt. It was sad to watch the change happen. When I was first, up until 2008, Highland Gamers were very friendly and kind online to each other. We all support each other. Now I read stuff Highland Gamers write. It's like, it's bro talk. It's like a bunch of 14-year-olds talking to each other, anonymous 14-year-olds talking. It's been interesting to watch the change. Okay, got a question here from my friend Ken. God bless you, Ken. After lifting way too heavy for too many years, well, that's an unusual thing to read. I needed a change. I really wasn't liking lifting anymore. Tried yoga, for a bit, but got bored. Then I found Tim Anderson's Original Strength and love it. Yeah, same. We're walking the same line here. Been doing the resets and working on crawls and different movements for time, and I feel great. For someone looking for overall health and longevity, should I add anything else in? Well, if you're doing an intelligent strength training program, something that's not, beating you down and, taking you down, and you're doing the resets and Tim Anderson's work, the only thing I would think of, and this is a missed area by some. Now, I'm assuming I would encourage loaded carries in your training, suitcase carries, farmer walks, prowlers, sled pulls, that kind of thing. Okay, put that there. Bear hug carries, put that there. But I would also recommend rucking. Maybe one day a week, put 20 to 35 pounds, 10 to 15 kilos in a backpack, maybe even put hand weights in your hands, and just go for an extended walk. I think in a typical week, you need to train long, you need to train heavy, and you need to do something in the middle. Those would be the middle would be your bodybuilding movements in the weight room. The middle would be your resets, something that it builds up mobility, flexibility, hypertrophy, some power, and then the heavy lifting will help you with the strength and the other qualities. But you do need to do something long. The reason I like rucking for most people who've been lifting for a while is that let me tell you this idea I had. So I worked with a young man who weighed 350 pounds, about 155 kilos. So he started walking and medical intervention. He was losing weight every single workout. I mean, Monday he weighed this, Tuesday he weighed that. Every single day, he lost a little more. And then, boop, it didn't work anymore. I had this insight that when he was weighing 350 pounds, he was rucking every workout. Well, when it got down to 320, 30 pounds lighter, he was becoming too efficient as a walker. So we came with this idea of just adding a light vest to him. And not surprisingly, the weight started coming down again. So, I mean, I don't know if you should go pound for pound, but when you first go walking, you never walked before, you get these wonderful benefits from walking. And then your body adapts to it, and then you don't get the benefits so much. So the nice thing about walking and then slowly adding load is that you're keeping yourself very inefficient as a walker. Adding loads to the hands so that you have to walk and pump is a very poor way of walking. So that might be a real good idea for you. Lift, reset, rock. You know, I break up what I can help you with into four parts. I think I'm really good at one of them, the other three, not so much. But I think I can help you with health. And the best thing I can do with health is telling you to go see a medical doctor, a dentist 3 times a year, and an eye doctor. Get your blood tests, obviously wear your seatbelt, floss your teeth. The other area is longevity. And longevity is an issue of quality and quantity. In my family, we don't live long. But there are things we can do to increase that. I'm going to come right back to this one in just a moment. The next one is fitness. Now, the fitness is ability to do a task. If I am qualified to help you on the task that you choose, I can help you. For example, if you want to throw the discus, or you want to get better at yoga, or you want to do this or that. And then there's a thing called performance, which is the fourth one, which I really specialize in. That's when they call your name, you step up, and you do something. And that's why I like working so much with Broadway actors and dancers so much, because, you know, the curtain comes up, the spotlight hits them in the face, and they got to dance. Every night at 8 o'clock on the dot, boom, curtain, spotlight. When they call your name at the Nationals, John, all of a sudden you realize, well, I hope I did everything right the last 8 years, because here we go. But getting back to longevity, there's some issues in longevity I want to talk about. You know, one of the things that comes up a lot is this, and I've mentioned it before here, but this idea about coffee seems to be something that they like to say is terrible for you. And I'm drinking a delicious cup of Folgers right now. I don't get sponsored. It's good for you, it's bad for you, it's good for you, it's bad for you. It turns out that the oil that's on top, in an old, I call it church coffee, when you look down and you see all the blues and gold colors that are on the oil, I've been told that that is the secret to what makes coffee so healthy. I guess it's full of antioxidants. Red wine is good for you, it's bad for you, it's good for you, it's bad for you. And then they found out there's this little thing inside of it called resveratrol or something like that, and it's a magic thing. But when they put the coffee oil or the resveratrol in a pill, it doesn't seem to help you at all. And my thought is, and it's been there for a while, is that when you're having a bad day, I go out for a cup of coffee with you. My wife and I, when we're on the road, we crack open a bottle of wine, we sit on a deck, we talk, we knit, we increase our tapestry, we laugh. And I think that's why coffee and red wine increase longevity. It's the knitting. Just before I left, and this isn't a happy story, but last week when I was talking to Brian in our podcast, I had to leave because my neighbor's wife had fallen down, and he had run across the street and he needed help. He's an older gentleman. He needed help getting her up. So I got there, we ran across the street, we took care of her, we got her in the car. She was heading off to a doctor's appointment, and she's fine and everything's okay. But as Brian and I were just summing up this idea of coffee and wine, that's also what makes good neighbors. And your longevity, and we talk about this sometimes, just a quick segue about you're the sum of the 5 people you hang around the most. But I hate to say it, love them or hate them, your neighbors are people you hang around with a lot. So connecting with your neighbors, there's a How I Met Your Mother where Ted says to the couple, he says, the only time, all you do in New York is you nod to your neighbors and then call 911 when there's a terrible smell coming from the room. And I thought, that's a terrible image of what a neighbor is. Your neighbors, your family members who live close to you, those are the ones who might be the difference between life and death for you. And so make sure you do your best to be a good neighbor. Invite them over for coffee and a bottle of wine, and do your best to, if they're doing a fundraiser for their grandson, you kick in a little bit. You help out when you can. There's that old State Farm commercial. They don't say anymore, like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. I guess we've forgotten that good neighbors are there. So that was just something Brian and I wanted to talk about before we end this week's podcast.